Everyone to the fourth session of on consciousness. So before we start the session, let's just step back for a few moments of silence. So greetings everyone and welcome to the fourth session of On Consciousness with Dr. Soumitra Basu. This session, I understand Dr. Basu will be addressing the inconscience because in the inconscience is hidden, in the depths of the unconscious is hidden the divine presence, and is the development of this divine presence within the unconscious, which is the process of evolution. So I'm very much looking forward to the insights of this session, and I hand you over to Dr. Basu.
Thank you, James, and thanks everybody for being on the fourth day.
Thank you.
So we'll focus today on the inconscience. As you know, the word unconscious was used by Freud and collective unconscious was used by Jung. But beyond the unconscious of Freud, beyond the collective unconscious of Jung, is the inconscience of Aurobindo. So the unconscious of Jung is Aurobindo's subconscious. What Aurobindo calls the subconscious corresponds to the unconscious of Jung. What Jung calls of Freud, of the unconscious of Freud is corresponding to the subconscious of Aurobindo. And of Jung, the collective unconscious is the lower part of the cosmic consciousness. The lowest part of the cosmic consciousness is what he named as collective unconscious. We'll come to them. But beyond them is Aurobindo's inconscience. So inconscience is a very difficult concept. It is a plane where there is no consciousness. There is no consciousness at all. But phenomenally, there is no consciousness. Fundamentally, consciousness has got hidden inside it, got dormant inside it. So phenomenally, there is no consciousness. But functionally, consciousness has got involved in it to the process of involution. The supreme consciousness has got hidden inside it. So that is the fundamental thing. The phenomenal is different from the fundamental. So we'll go on in screen sharing. So this is the common approach, the psychoanalytic approach of the unconscious. The psychoanalysis views the unconscious as a psychological construct that underlies conscious awareness. And scientists engaged in consciousness research view the inconscient as primordial matter. So there's a difference between the scientist approach and the psychoanalyst approach. Because science believes that evolution begins from the inconscious, so they begin from matter, because for them matter is the last point. Only in spirituality considers that beyond matter is something else from which matter has evolved. So scientists engaged in consciousness research views the inconscient as primordial matter, and psychoanalysis views the unconscious as a psychological construct that underlies conscious awareness. In Sri Aurobindo's view, evolution starts from the inconscious. Hence, the inconscious must antedate both matter and the unconscious. Because evolution starts from the inconscious, it must antedate both the matter and unconscious. Therefore, there must be a subtle poise of the inconscience that exists prior to evolution. Therefore, there must be a subtle poise of the inconscience that exists prior to evolution. So you see, both scientists and the psychoanalysts, they believe in the unconscious or the inconscience, but in a different way from Sri Aurobindo. Inconscience in its subtle poise is the end result of the involutionary movement, while in the gross poise is the starting point of the evolutionary movement. In the subtle poise, it is the end result of the involutionary movement. The involutionary movement where consciousness descended and got involved in matter. And the gross poise, it is the starting point of the evolutionary movement. The transition is possible. This transition between the involution and evolution, that is, there has to be a transition, no? Because things have got involved in it and things will evolve. So there has to be a transition from one point from one phase to the other phase. The transition is possible because the highest creative principle of the supermind becomes embedded in the inconscience. Instead of ascribing the inconscious as inert and without qualia, Sri Aurobindo described it as a creative inconscience. Therefore, inconscience, though it is described by science as inert and without qualia, without qualities, Sri Aurobindo described it as a creative inconscience, as a creative inconscience. The inconscience is creative. Evolution begins with the inconscient, complete inconscience. And from this inconscience, the subconscient gradually emerges. Evolution begins with the inconscient, complete inconscience, and from this inconscience, a subconscient gradually emerges. This is not a hypothetical construct in Sri Aurobindo's case, but a deep spiritual experiential realization that emerged from a very painstaking probe of the inconscience, which Sri Aurobindo partially hinted in his famous poem, A God's Labor, and sonnet titled In the Battle. Of course, it is there in many other writings, in many other poems, it is there, the inconscience thing is there, but it is very much prominent in the God's Labor, where he speaks of his own labor, and the sonnet titled In the Battle, where he speaks also of his own battle. So, all things are not hypothetical constructs. They have come from deep experiential realization. So this is what I want to stress, that this is not a hypothetical construct. What Sri Aurobindo says has come from experience. From experience, what has come, he has noted down. So evolution begins with inconscient, complete inconscience, and from this inconscient, the subconscient gradually emerges. The mother relieved the experience in one of her trances. The mother relieved the experience of the inconscience in one of her trances, which we will go through. We'll go through that experience. And that revealed how the inert immobility of the inconscient otherwise is inert immobility, is the feature, was the starting point of evolution. How the inert immobility of the inconscient was the starting point of evolution. Evolution started from an inconscient which was immobile. But there was another immobility containing all movements that was not inert, but the immobility of the origin. She discovered that there was another immobility there, one immobility from which evolution starts, but another immobility containing all the movements that was not inert, but the immobility of the origin. And that meant that this may find back that, this may find back that. That means we can get back to our Godhead. We can get back to our Godhead, which means that the inert immobility of the inconscient had to trace its way back to the totipotent immobility of the origin. The inert immobility of the inconscient would trace its way back to the immobility of the origin, which was totipotential, which was full of potencies. And that inconscient from which evolution starts is phenomenally inert. At the same time, the inconscience contains two types of immobility. There is an immobility that is inert, and there is an immobility that is totipotent, that is full of the origin, the immobility of the origin. So this is very important, mother's discovery that the inconscient had two immobilities, one an inert immobility and one a totipotent immobility. One an immobility from which evolution starts and another the immobility of the origin. And two together meant that from one could go to the other. One could go back towards creative source. One could go back to the Godhead. The general subconscious that at first emerges from the inconscience moves to the vegetable and animal kingdoms and culminates in consciousness with the appearance of mind in man. So from the inconscious, the subconscious emerges. And think of the subconscious in a general way, in a cosmic sense. The subconscious is not used here. Aurobindo doesn't use the subconscious as Freud used. He is using it as in a cosmic sense. It's not in an individual sense. In a cosmic sense, the general subconscious, that is why I use the word general subconscious. It's not a personal unconscious. It is not a personal unconscious. It is a general unconscious, subconscious, that at first emerges from the inconscience, moves to vegetable and animal kingdoms, and culminates in consciousness with the appearance of mind in man. Of course, everything was consciousness, but man becomes aware of himself, so man becomes aware of consciousness. Spiritual wisdom assures us that this movement of consciousness is progressive. Spiritual wisdom assures us that this movement of consciousness is progressive, and in proportion as man evolves, it will lead to a superconscience. Now, this is what spirituality adds to the general theory of evolution. General theory of evolution finishes when man appears. Man appears, it finishes. Or sometimes people like Eccles have said that cultural evolution is to be left, that has to be finished, and something else, but not in a general way, very in a roundabout way they are saying. But in a general way, the evolution of human being is to continue until the superconscious is revealed. The unconscious in Freudian term refers to a psychological repertoire of mental contents and processes that lie outside the range of conscious awareness. Now this is important. The inconscious described by Aurobindo extends beyond the individual to merge with the terrestrial inconscience. The inconscience described by Aurobindo extends beyond the individual to merge with the terrestrial inconscience. This inconscience is as much a material inconscience as a biological inconscience and a psychological inconscience. You know, there was once a debate going on in Sakar, and what is collective in Aurobindo's system? Collective yoga, we call collective yoga. What is collective yoga in Aurobindo's system? Makaran Paranjali asked this question. He said, I don't find anything collective. He didn't find 20 people sitting and inhaling by one nostril and exhaling by the other nostril. That is what he must have meant. But then there were various reactions, and one of the answers that was given was the fact that an individual, when he goes to the unconscious below, an individual, when he descends to the unconscious, from the unconscious one descends to the inconscious, and from the inconscious descends to the terrestrial inconscious. And in the terrestrial inconscious, there is no individuality. There is no individuality. So one merges with the terrestrial inconscience. That means to rise up in consciousness, one has to wait till the terrestrial consciousness gets uplifted a bit. Means individually you can go to a certain point. You can ascend to a certain point, and then you have to wait until the terrestrial consciousness is itself uplifted a bit. Because the terrestrial inconscious, everything merges with the terrestrial inconscious. And every individual, while descending in oneself, descends into one's personal unconscious, and the personal unconscious finally descends into the terrestrial inconscious. So the terrestrial inconscious means that there is no individuality there. There is no individuality there. So individual, when he is going up, he can go up to a certain extent, and from there he has to wait till the terrestrial consciousness of the earth is raised a bit, and then again he can again progress further, and again wait after some time until the terrestrial consciousness is raised again a bit further. So I say that what is more collective in collective yoga than this? This in collective yoga is, if you say that Aurobindo's yoga is collective yoga, this is the reason why it is collective yoga. Because it cares for the collectivity. It doesn't care for the individual alone. And to care for the collectivity, the individual has to merge with the terrestrial inconscience. The individual psychology has to merge with the terrestrial inconscience. How is the inconscience produced? Aurobindo explained that the supreme consciousness containing all potentialities admitted a principle of divisibility. The primary unity which was there, admitted a principle of divisibility, and once admitted, this phenomenon resulted in repeated fragmentation. This fragmentation became so total that all forms and forces, losing their identity, became concealed in what is not truly but phenomenally an inconscience, a sleeping and hidden consciousness. So supreme consciousness containing all the potentialities had admitted a principle of divisibility, a principle of division was admitted. And because of the principle of division, fragmentation started happening. And fragmentation went on until it became absolute. It became total. And all forms and forces, they lose their identity, become concealed. They lose their identity, they become opposites, and they lose their identity. And what is not truly but phenomenally an inconscience, they become what is not truly but phenomenally an inconscience. The inconscience starts with manifesting the matter principle. Matter is initially present in the inconscience, not as forms, but as energy, motional, vibratory, etheric, as motional, vibratory, etheric energy. So matter is present not as forms but as energy. When matter has been permeated by life energy to an optimal extent, the mind principle manifests. In the process of manifesting these hidden principles, the inconscious itself undergoes qualitative changes. The inconscious begins to change qualitatively. So matter is initially present as energy, and then when life energy comes, and when the life energy comes, then life energy produces forms. The pressure of life energy produces forms. And then the mind principle manifests when the life energy has been permeated, has permeated the matter principle to an optimal extent. So in the process of manifesting these hidden principles, the inconscious itself undergoes qualitative changes. The mother in her experiential mystic journey described how the inconscious suffered a qualitative change after the mind principle manifested in evolution. Using her occult knowledge, the mother probed the different zones of inconscience. And that zone of inconscience which gave rise to the mind principle, that zone of inconscience which gave rise to the mind, gave the impression of something hard, rigid, coagulated, as if coagulated for a resistance. So it was not so hard before. It was not so resistant before. When the mind was to be manifest, at that point, the resistance was maximum. So mother used her occult knowledge to probe the different zones of inconscience. And that zone of inconscience which gave rise to the mind principle gave the impression of something hard, rigid, coagulated, as if coagulated for a resistance. We'll come to that. We'll come to how mother has gone through this experience, has gone through experience. The mental inconscience appears so resistant that all efforts made the impression on it. She described that the zone of mental inconscience is much more coarse than a purely material inconscience. It's much more coarse than a purely material inconscience. You can imagine. We think that the mental will be finer, but the resistance of the mental inconscience is much more than a purely material inconscience. All this rigidity, hardness, narrowness, mother says, fixity, opposition came from mental presence in the creation. This is what the mind has brought into the inconscient. When the mind had not manifested, the inconscient was not like this. It was formless and had the plasticity of formless things. That plasticity has disappeared. So she describes how the activation of the dormant mind principle made the inconscient aggressive and obstinate. Made the inconscient aggressive and obstinate. How aggressive it was, we'll come to know when mother speaks, but I will tell you about mother's experiment in her own words. But mind this, that all this rigidity, hardness, narrowness comes from mental presence in the creation. This is what mind has brought into the inconscient. When the mind had not manifested, the inconscient was not like that. It was formless and had the plasticity of formless things. That plasticity has now disappeared. As mother describes, I was in fact trying to look into the mental inconscience of people. And this mental inconscience refuses to change. Well, the other did not. The purely material inconscience has no mode of being. It does not exist. It is not organized in any way. While this one is an organized inconscience, organized to the beginning of a mental influence, and it is 100 times worse. So that is the result of the mind, our beautiful mind with all these oddities. So she was trying to look into the mental inconscience of the people, and this mental inconscience refuses to change. People refuse to change. People refuse to change either because the inconscience refuses to change, while the other did not. The purely material inconscience has no mode of being. It does not exist. It is not organized in any way. It is not organized. The purely material inconscience is not organized, but the mental inconscience is organized. Jung's description of the collective unconscious was corroborated by his dream of a house. You see, Jung had a dream that from the floor of his house ran a staircase, and he came down the staircase. He came to a floor several centuries back, and the furniture of the room was also several centuries old. And from there again another staircase descended, and he came to further back. So he moves further and further in time, and every time the furniture changes, the milieu changes, the ambience changes to the past of that period. So he goes on, he goes on descending. From every floor there a staircase comes, and he descends to another floor. From that floor, the staircase comes, he descends to another floor. All the floors take him several centuries back, centuries and centuries back, until he comes to a point where there is a low cave cut into a rock, wherein the thick dust lay scattered bones and pieces of broken pottery of a prehistoric past. Which means he comes to prehistoric period, when history was not recorded. He comes to a prehistoric period when history was not recorded. So that he saw dust and broken pottery of the past. So they signify traces of atavistic past within the human psyche that cannot be illuminated in the waking consciousness. So, and he then surmised that every individual contents is connected with this whole history of the earth. Very beautiful dream you had. You see, you also was a very great psychologist and much close to Aurobindo than Freud. And you had this beautiful dream, and this dream were going back to centuries until it comes to prehistory period. It shows that one is connected with the whole history of the earth. The whole history of the earth is connected to each individual, and therefore we are open to all things in the cosmic consciousness. Actually, he is saying, our interpretation would be that man is connected with the cosmic consciousness. Jung's dream is showing that man is connected with the cosmic consciousness. And in the cosmic consciousness, one is connected with all things of the past. And therefore, from all things of the past, all the things that have gone back before, things come to us. Things come to us in dreams. Things come to us as symbols. Myths come to us, myths, M-Y-T-H-S, myths come to us, symbols come to us, dreams come to us. All these things come to us, and we see the same kind of dream. Everybody sees the same kind of dream. We all dream of snakes. We all dream of falling down. We have common dreams, which everybody dreams. All these things happen because one is connected with the history of the earth. So this dream gave him that cue that one is connected with the history of the earth. And the history of the earth contains all the past records, all the past things. For example, I told you that the benzene ring, when it was discovered, that the Kekule saw a snake eating its own tail. And this is something which is there in the Greek culture. This symbol was there in the Greek culture, the symbol of Shakti in the Greek culture. And it was remaining in the cosmic consciousness. As one is connected with the past, this thing came into Kekule. You considered that Freud's description of the unconscious actually pertained to the personal unconscious, which is a reservoir of suppressed or repressed material that was once conscious. So you consider that Freud's description of the unconscious actually pertained to the personal unconscious, which is a reservoir of suppressed or repressed material that was once conscious. Once it was conscious, then it got repressed, it got suppressed. That is Freud's unconscious. Or one, you saw an accident. Suppose you saw an accident, and always remembering that accident would be disastrous for you. So that memory of that accident slips into the unconscious. It is repressed into the unconscious. So, and while his own description of the collective unconscious contained the accumulation of psychic structures and archetypal experiences of universal significance. Archetypal experiences of universal significance. Symbolic experiences. Of symbolic experiences, and one symbol might be in charge of a particular set of things. These are archetypal experiences. Accumulation of psychic structures and archetypal experiences of universal significance. The mother's description of the inconscious encompassed both the personal unconscious of Freud and collective unconscious of Jung. Mother's description of the inconscious, of course, mother doesn't cancel the two experiments of Freud and Jung, but includes them, but exceeds them. Mother exceeds them. And addition has two more important characteristics. The mother's description of the inconscious is two important characteristics. Firstly, the inconscious is not merely a psychological and cultural construct. To Freud, it is a psychological construct. To Jung, it is a psychosocial and cultural construct, but equally a material and biological inconscience. Inconscience is not only a psychological inconscience, it is equally a material and a biological inconscience. And secondly, the nadir of inconscience carries the seeds of the superconscious. The nadir of inconscience carries the seed of the superconscious. It is always, the mother says, it is always the same idea that the highest height touches the deepest depth. The highest height touches the deepest depth. The universe is like a circle. It is represented by a serpent that bites his own tail. So you see that figure of serpent eating its own tail, which came in and which stimulated the origin of the benzene ring, is a very ancient symbol. It is represented by a serpent that bites his own tail. The universe is like a circle. That means that the supreme height touches the most material matter without any intermediary. The supreme height can touch the most material matter without any intermediary. Freud's description of the unconscious is the individual's repertoire of repressed conflicts and instincts that can surge up to manifest psychopathology. So what Freud discovered, the unconscious were things in the consciousness which we don't want to remember or which we are averse to remember. They get repressed in the unconscious, and from where they can come up, they can surge up in dreams, in psychopathology, means in psychiatric illnesses. It does this with the past, and the future projections are interpreted from analyzing the components that constitute the burden of the past. That means Freud's unconscious deals with the past. Whatever experience one had has got repressed, and afterwards it can come forward, it can surge forward. So it deals with the past, and the future projections are interpreted from analyzing the components that constitute the burden of the past. So Freud talks about the past, because whatever happened, already happened, that has become repressed. Not what will happen afterwards, but what happened before has been repressed, and by analyzing that you can understand something of the future. Jung's collective unconscious carries the past burden of the human race. As a whole, futuristic projection depends upon the interpretations of what exists. So futuristic projection depends upon what exists, because all the past, Jung is also connected with the past. So none of them are connected with the future, though they are connected, Freud and Jung are connected with the future from their past. Not the future from the future, but the future from the past. In sharp contrast, the inconscious in Sherman's paradigm carries the seeds of the future that has never manifested so far. The potentiality of the new birth that is yet to evolve out of the inconscious. So in sharp contrast, the inconscious in Sherman's paradigm carries the seeds of the future that has never manifested so far. The potentiality of the new birth that is yet to evolve out of the inconscious. Now, we'll talk about the mother's experiential journey in details, using our own words. The mother's experiential visualization of the inconscious during a deep dynamic meditation, revealed the structural and functional composition of the inconscience. The structural and functional composition of the inconscience, as she described how she was literally dragged down as if into a hole. Now, Jung got his whole idea of collective unconscious from a dream of descending through staircases, ultimately going back in time, descending and descending until he came to prehistory. And Mother gives similarly her experiment in conscience in a meditative state, in a trance. So there is a difference. You had made it in his dream. The mother makes it in her meditation, in a trance. She also descends into the inconscience. Her descent is different from Jung's descent. Her descent is very different from Jung's descent. She also descends into the inconscient. And Jung also descended into the inconscient and discovered the collective unconscious. Mother descends into the inconscious to discover something else. So she was literally dragged down as if into a hole. In this hole, now I would request all of you to listen very carefully to what Mother has herself said, because I have kept her own words in this whole thing to impress upon you the importance of Mother's discovery vis-a-vis Jung's. In this hole, I went down into a fissure between two steep rocks. Rocks made of something harder than basalt, black, metallic at the same time. So she is going down through a fissure between two steep rocks. And the rocks are harder than basalt, black, metallic at the same time, with edges so sharp that you have the impression that were you to touch them, you would be flayed, you would be lacerated. So it was very difficult to pass through them because the edges were very sharp. There were rocks, they were very hard rocks, they were black and metallic, and their edges were so sharp that it lacerated the person who is going down. It was something that seemed to have no bottom and no end. And it became narrower and narrower like a funnel. It became narrower and narrower like a funnel. So when it becomes narrow, the sharp edges become more prominent. They flay you more, they lacerate you more. So narrow that there was almost no room left even for the consciousness to pass. There was no room left even for the consciousness to pass. So it was such a narrow passage. And that narrow passage becomes narrower and narrower, like a funnel. So you imagine what kind of trouble Mother had in going to the inconscience. She is not meditating on very lovely things as we feel that when we meditation we have to meditate on very lovely things, on very nice things. It's not like that. She is descending into the inconscience, which is a journey between two rocks, and the rocks are black and metallic, and the rocks have sharp edges which lacerate you, and then the passage becomes narrower and narrower, so that no room is left even for the consciousness to pass. That means not only the individual, the consciousness cannot pass. The consciousness of the mother could not pass. It was so difficult for the consciousness of the mother to pass through that tunnel. The bottom was invisible, a black hole that went down, down and down, without air, without light, only a kind of glimmer, like a reflection at the peak of the rocks. A glimmer that came from beyond, from something that could be the heavens, but something invisible. The bottom was invisible, a black hole that went down and down. No air, no light, only a glimmer of something that from up, a glimmer that came from beyond. So there is a glimmer, there is something dark and there is darkness, there is no air, there is no light, but there is still something from above. There is a glimmer from above, a glimmer from something that could be the heavens. A glimmer from something that could be the heavens, but something invisible. Something invisible. So no air, no light, darkness, black, but still there is a glimmer. And a glimmer from very high above, a glimmer from perhaps the heavens. I continued to slide down the fissure, and I saw the edges, the black rods cut with scissors as it were, shining like a fresh cut. The edges so sharp that they were like knives. Imagine what difficulty mother had. Imagine what difficulty mother had while going down, while she was being lacerated, cut with scissors as it were, shining like a fresh cut, edges so sharp that they were like knives. Here was one, there another, everywhere, all around. And I was dragged down. I went down, and there was no end to it. It became more and more oppressive, stifling, suffocating. Imagine what amount of torment the mother had, what amount of turmoil the mother had. Just imagine that she is sliding down the fissure with edges so sharp that they are like scissors, like knives, and then here is one, there is another, everywhere it is there. And I was dragged down, I went down, and there was no end to it. It became more and more oppressive, stifling, suffocating. So just imagine what kind of inconscience the mother was experiencing. What kind of inconscience the mother was experiencing. What is the inconscience? Just imagine. Physically, the body followed. It participated in the experience. So you see, it is not she in a trance state. In a trance state, her body is also following that experiment. That experience, the body followed. It participated in the experience. The hand that was on the arm of the chair slipped down. Then the other hand. Then the head bent down in an irresistible movement. You see, physically also, she is not only psychologically going down. Physically, she is going down. The hand that was on the arm of the chair slipped down. The other hand also. Then the head bent down. Then I said to myself, but this must stop. For if it continues, my head will be down on the ground. You see, it was so much that she said to herself that this must stop. For if it continues, my head will be down on the ground. And I asked myself, what is there at the bottom of this hole? What is there at the bottom of this hole? Hardly had I formulated the question, when it was as if I had touched a spring that was there at the very bottom of the hole. At the very bottom of the hole, she touched a spring. A spring I had not noticed yet, which acted at once with a tremendous force, and at one bound shot me up straight into the air. So she came into contact with the spring at the bottom of the hole, and the spring, the thing that came out from the spring, shoots her up. I was cast out of the fissure into a limitless, formless vast, which was infinitely comfortable, not exactly warm, but it gave a comfortable impression of inner warmth. So you see, now the anticlimax happens. That she touches a spring, and which acts with a tremendous force and shoots her up in the air. I was cast out of the fissure into limitless, formless vast, which was infinitely comfortable, not exactly warm, but it gave a comfortable impression of inner warmth, of inner security. So this is an anticlimax. After this painful enough descent, it was a kind of super comfort, and ease at its maximum, that have been shot into a place limitless, formless, vast, which was one. And my body immediately followed the movement. The head at once becomes straight again. Incidentally, the mother had become bent because her system had taken all the negative things of the world, all the burden of the world, and that made her head bent. Actually, her head was bent. Actually, her head was bent because the head was bent because of the things she accrued in her sadhana, and the things that she accrued included all the negative influences of the world. Now, this head at once became straight again, and I lived all this without objectifying it at all. I was not taking stock of what it was. I did not look for any explanation of what was happening. It was what it was. I lived it, and that was all. The experience was absolutely spontaneous. So she lived all this without objectifying it at all. As she says, I was not taking stock of what it was. She was not judging things. That means she was not judging. She was perfectly non-judgmental. She was seeing things as things unrolled. She was completely neutral. She was completely neutral, and she was seeing things as things unrolled. I did not look for any explanation of what was happening. It was what it was. I lived it, and that was all. I lived it, and that was all. The experience was absolutely spontaneous. So there was nothing hidden in it. It was a spontaneous experience. It was all powerful, infinitely rich. It had no form at all, no limit. Naturally, I was identified with it. And that is what I knew, that it had neither limit nor form. Because she was identified with it, this experience had no limit and had no form at all, and no limit. It was as if this vast was made up of countless imperceptible points. She was shot into a vastness. And that vastness is what? That vastness was made up of countless imperceptible points. Points that did not occupy any place in space. There was no space, you see. Points that were a deep, warm gold. Now we will come to explanation of these things. Why she saw this? Deep, warm gold. But this was only an impression, translation. So this is very important, because this explanation of this theory will unroll what is going to happen in the future. The explanation of this deep warm gold will unroll what will happen in the future. So it was as if this vast was made up of countless imperceptible points that did not occupy any space. Any place is space. It is difficult for us to understand that. It is very difficult for us to understand that what mothers means by points that did not occupy any place in space. Because there was no space, you see. Points that were a deep, warm gold, but this was only an impression, a translation of a deep, warm gold. And all that was absolutely living with a power that seemed infinite. Because there is no space, because it is not happening in our space. This experience is not happening in what we perceive as our space. It is happening in some other dimension. This experience is happening in some other dimension, not our space. And all that was absolutely living with a power that seemed infinite. And yet it was immobile, with an immobility so perfect that it gave a feeling of eternity, but with an unbelievable inner intensity of movement and life. It was inner, self-contained, and immobile in relation to the outside, if there was an outside. And all that was absolutely living with a power that seemed infinite. So it was a living experience, and living with a power that seemed infinite, and yet it was immobile. Because there is neither space, there is also no time. It is immobile. So because it is occurring at some others, not in our space and time. It is not occurring. Experience is occurring not in our space and our time. In some other space, in some other time. Yet it was immobile, with an immobility so perfect that it gave a feeling of eternity, but with an unbelievable inner intensity of movement and life. So at the same time, it was immobile and gave a feeling of eternity, but it was intense. Experience was intense. It was inner, self-contained and immobile in relation to the outside, if there was an outside. And it had boundless life. It may be spoken of by infinite only by way of image. An intensity, a strength, a force, a peace, the peace of eternity, a silence, a calm, a power capable of everything. And I did not think of it. I did not objectify it. I lived it comfortably, very comfortably. This lasted for a very long time, for the rest of the meditation. So at one point she was wanting to stop when she was descending. And at the other point, now she is wanting to last for a long time. Very comfortably she lives in that vastness with imperceptible points. After a moment, I asked myself, what is this? To what does it correspond? She asked herself, what is this? To what does it correspond? Naturally, I found afterwards, and finally this morning I told myself, well, it is just to give me my message for the coming year. Because she will write down the gist of that experience in a message for the coming year, the New Year's message she will make. Then I transcribed it. Naturally, you cannot make a description. It is indescribable. It was a psychological phenomenon, and the forms were nothing but a way of describing the psychological state to oneself. When I transcribed it, naturally, you cannot make a description. It is indescribable. It was a psychological phenomenon, and the forms were nothing but a way of describing the psychological state to oneself. And this is what I noted, obviously in a mental way. I have described nothing, I have only stated a fact. She says what she wrote down was not a description of anything, it was a fact. And what she wrote? At the very bottom of the inconscience, most hard and rigid and narrow and stiffening, I struck upon an almighty spring that cast me up forthwith into a formless, limitless vast, vibrating with the seeds of a new world. At the very bottom of the inconscience, most hard and rigid and narrow and stifling, which was there, I struck upon an almighty spring that cast me up forthwith into a formless, limitless vast, into a vast that is formless and limitless, vibrating with the seeds of a new world, but at the same time vibrating with the seeds of a new world. There was in fact this entire impression of power, of warmth and of gold. It was not fluid, but like a powdery mist. There was in fact this entire impression of power, of warmth and gold of these particles. No? It was not fluid, but like a powdery mist. And each one of these things, they cannot be called particles or fragments or even points. A point that does not occupy any place in space. And each one of these things was like living gold, a powdery mist of warm gold. One cannot call it bright, nor one can call it dark. Neither was it light, a multitude of small points of gold. Nothing but that. A multitude of small points of gold. Nothing but that. So this entire impression of power, of warmth and gold. All the particles there. And each one of these things was like a living gold, a powdery mist of warm gold. One cannot call it bright, nor one can call it dark, neither was it light, a multitude of small points of gold. Nothing but that. One could say that they touched my eyes, my face, and with a tremendous force. At the same time, there was a feeling of a plenitude, of an all-powerful peace. It was rich, it was full. It was movement at its maximum, infinitely more swift than anything that one can imagine. At the same time, it was absolute peace, perfect stillness. So there was a feeling of plenitude, of an all-powerful peace, a richness. So it was a movement that was more swift than anything one can imagine. But at the same time, it was absolutely peaceful, perfect stillness. And this almighty spring was the perfect image of what happens, is bound to happen and will happen for everybody. All at once you shoot up into the vast. And this almighty spring was the perfect image of what happens, is bound to happen and will happen for everybody. All at once you shoot up into the vast. The character of the inconscious, no significance of these characteristics. The character of the inconscience changed from the plasticity of formlessness at the level of material inconscience to rigidity and resistance at the zone of mental inconscience. The character of we are signifying the whole experience of mother. First, the character of the inconscience changes from the plasticity of formlessness at the level of material inconscience to rigidity and resistance at the zone of mental inconscience. In other words, the mind more complex, vibrant, and exuberant than the simplicity of the material world, a spontaneity of life energy in renewable nature, poses a greater and more organized resistance to the growth and transformation of consciousness. So that means that the mind more complex, vibrant, and exuberant than the simplicity of the material world or the spontaneity of vital. See, mind is more complex compared to the simplicity of matter and the vibrancy and the spontaneity of life energy. But it poses a greater and more organized resistance to the growth and transformation of consciousness. The almighty spring at the bedrock of inconscience signified the presence of the divine, the supreme creative consciousness at the very bosom of the inconscience. It is as if the supreme already exists in the nadir of the inconscience to enable us to touch the supreme at the heights of consciousness. So the almighty spring at the bedrock of inconscience signifies the presence of the divine, the supreme creative consciousness at the very bosom of the inconscience. At the very bosom of the inconscience, there is the supreme creative consciousness. While Jung's dim vision of the unconscious ends in a cave cut into primitive rock with scattered bones embedded in prehistoric dust, the mother's vision of the inconscious touches the perennial spring at the bottom of a seemingly endless hole that winds its way through black rocks with knife-sharp edges, ostensibly signifying resistance to the flow of consciousness. So resistance to the flow of consciousness. So all these edges, the sharp edges of the rocks which were lacerating mother, they were signifying resistance to the flow of consciousness. They were signifying resistance to the flow of consciousness. Resistance is explicit in both directions. Consciousness works to resistance as it is released slowly from the inconscious to climb the steps of the evolutionary spiral. Consciousness works to resistance as it descends from the heights to transform the inconscious. So resistance is there at two levels. One during descent of the consciousness, there is resistance. One during ascent of the consciousness in evolution, there is resistance at every level. So resistance is there at every level. At each level of the descent, there is resistance. At each level of the ascent of consciousness to evolution, there is resistance. The perennial spring at the nadir of the inconscience shoots into a formless, limitless vastness, teeming with the seeds of the new world, the new creation that is yet to manifest. The new world is the new creation that is yet to manifest. The mother categorically explains that the new world does not refer to the primordial creation, does not refer to the primordial creation, but to the supramental creation. So the experience does not correspond to a return to the supreme origin of all. So it is referring not to the primordial creation, but to the supramental creation which has not happened so far. I had altogether the impression that I was projected in the origin of the supramental creation. It is something of the supreme that has already been objectified precisely for the sake of the supramental creation. So Mother says that she had the impression that she was projected into the origin of the supramental creation. It is something of the supreme that has already been objectified precisely for the sake of the supramental creation. Thus, unlike the unconscious described by Freud and Jung, which is the repository of the past, the inconscient in this paradigm is pregnant with the unborn future. The Mother also enumerated the qualities of the new supramental creation in making that can resist the downward pull of the inconscience, manifested in the impression of power, warmth, and gold. As she talks of the power, warmth, and gold, power symbolizes the invincible will that is co-will with knowledge. Power symbolizes an invincible will that is in tune with knowledge. One symbolizes the uninhibited bliss of the Supreme, and gold symbolizes the purity of the new creation that cannot be diluted with imperfection. So power, warmth, and gold. Power symbolizes an invincible will that is co-will with knowledge. Will follows knowledge. Will is one with knowledge. Will is not divorced from knowledge, as is the case of us. We have will, we have knowledge, but we don't have any synthesis between the two. Warm symbolizes the uninhibited bliss of the Supreme, and gold symbolizes the purity of the new creation that cannot be diluted with imperfection. Thus, if the inconscience is akin to night, one must also accept that in the bosom of the deepest darkness is the womb of the future dawn. If the inconscience is akin to night, one must also accept that in the bosom of the deepest darkness is the womb of the future dawn. Only it is the power of transformation that works in the inconscient can deliver the new world. The Mother assured that a perfect surrender, a total self-giving to the divine will, even in the midst of night, even in the abyss of ignorance, carries the conviction of his appearance one day. That a perfect surrender, a total self-giving to the divine will, even in the midst of night, even in the abyss of ignorance, carries the conviction of his appearance one day. As Mother said, there is the night and there is the sun, the night and sun, again the night, many nights, but one must cling to this will to surrender, cling to it as in a tempest and give up everything into the hands of the Supreme Lord until the day when the sun will come forever, the total victory. See, there is the night and there is the sun, the night and the sun, again the night, many nights, but one must cling to this will to surrender, cling to it as in a tempest, and give up everything into the hands of the Supreme Lord until the day when the sun will come forever, the total victory. It admits fragmentation or divisibility, as Mr. Madan has asked, why should it admit fragmentation or divisibility? Because unless fragmentation or divisibility happens, the manifestation will not occur. The manifestation requires fragmentation and division. Manifestation requires that everything has to be independent. Everything has to forget its origin. Because unless the origin is forgotten, then there cannot be a plethora of multiple things. For this multiplicity of the creation, it was necessary.
So, Doctor, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So the multiplicity means the quite opposite of what consciousness is. That is also one of the multiplicities. Is that the right understanding then?
Yes, yes.
So why would divine want to do that? I mean, I'm sorry, it's a bit of a silly question. Why would he want to be opposite of itself?
Ostensibly, it is due to the Leela of the divine. What explanation can you give except the concept of Leela? It is display to find itself by dividing itself and finding itself again.
So in the play, obviously there's pain and suffering, everything else involved in it. And the divine wants to experience that pain since the pain is within itself. Is that the correct way to understand it?
Yes?
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, it is both dark matter and antimatter. Everything falls under inconscience. Inconscience has no form. So ultimately, that whatever you call dark matter, antimatter, everything percolates into the everything ends up in the inconscience. Ultimately, the inconscience has no form. So what we do is during meditation at times, we can project like a torchlight, we can project the light into the inconscience below the base of the spine. When we meditate at once a month, we can do that. Bring from the end bottom from the base of the spine to project the torchlight like a torchlight, project the light into the inconscience. Of course, it will not be able to go much further. It will be taken up by darkness. But during meditation, when we meditate, we can do this, practice this for 5-6 minutes. If you are agree with me, we'll follow it. Close your eyes and consider the mind has become silent. Mind has become absolutely silent. If the mind has not, if you are unable to make the mind silent, take an imagery. Imagine the mind is a house which is locked. Mind is a house which is locked, and visitors are coming from all sides, and they can't enter a locked house, and they're encircling the house of the mind and is going away, and are going away. Your mind is a house which is locked. It is empty and silent. Your mind is empty and silent. It is a house that is locked. It is empty and silent. Visitors in the form of thoughts are coming from all sides to the house of the mind, but they can't enter a locked house, so they're encircling the house and they're passing away. While they're passing away, they're fading away. Visitors from all sides, thoughts from all sides are coming. They are getting magnified in front of the house of the mind. They're encircling the house of the mind, and then they are passing away. While passing away, they are fading away. And the mind has become silent, absolutely silent. The mind has become absolutely silent. When the mind has become absolutely silent, and when the mind has become absolutely silent, from very high above, a huge column of light and peace descends into the mind. Descends into the mind, a huge column of peace and light descends into the mind, fills it brim to brim, gets consolidated at the level of the mind. A huge column of peace and light descends into the mind, gets consolidated there. gets consolidated there at the level of the mind. So if the image goes away, bring the image again. The mind was silent. The mind was silent, and then from very high above, a huge column of peace and light enters the room of the mind, fills it brim to brim, enters the room of the mind, enters the house of the mind from very high above. Light and peace comes down, enters your mind and fills it brim to brim. And once it has got consolidated there, once the light has got light and peace have got consolidated there, bring down the light and peace along your vertical column. Bring down the light and peace along your vertical column, the base of the spine. Bring down the light and peace which had come down from very high above to your mind, got consolidated there, and after consolidation there, bring down it along your vertebral column, along your spinal cord, bring it down along your spinal cord, along your vertebral column, bring it down, down, down to the base of the spine. And when it is coming down, the light and peace is spreading outwards in the upper limbs. They are spreading outwards in the upper limb. They are spreading within the organs inside the system, the heart, lung, liver, kidney, everything. And when they come to the base of the spine, from where they extend into the lower limbs, the light and peace extends into the lower limbs. And when it has come to the base of the spine, project it like a torchlight into the inconscience, the darkness below the base of the spine. The inconscience is below the base of the spine. So the darkness below, project the light there. Project the light in the darkness below. Project like a torchlight, project the light into the darkness below. A little bit it will be able to go. It will not be able to go much, but the little bit is sufficient. The little bit is sufficient and it is bubbled up by darkness. So if the image goes back, goes away, bring it again. Your mind was absolutely silent. Your mind was absolutely silent. And from very high above, a huge column of peace and light had descended into the mind, had filled it up brim to brim. And once it got consolidated there, you bring it down along your vertebral column to the base of the spine. You bring it down along the vertebral column to the base of the spine. And when it is coming down, 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 it is spreading to your upper limbs. It is spreading to the organs inside your body. And when it has come down to the base of the spine, from there it goes to the lower limbs. The light and peace travel to the lower limbs. And from the base of the spine, like a torch light, the light and peace are radiated below. Like a torch light, it is reflected below until where it goes in the darkness below. In the darkness below, the light is penetrating. The light is penetrating the darkness below. It will not be able to penetrate much, doesn't matter. A little thing, a little bit is necessary. For cleaning the inconscience is necessary. Cleaning the inconscience is necessary in integral yoga. Dealing with the inconscience is necessary in integral yoga. So, if the image goes away, bring it again. Your mind had become silent, absolutely silent, and from very high above, peace and light descended into your mind. It got consolidated there. It got consolidated there, and then it descends around the vertebral column. Peace and light descends around the vertebral column to the base of the spine. While it is descending, it is it is going to the upper limbs. It is going to the organs inside the body. It goes from the base of the spine, it goes into the lower limbs. And from the base of the spine, you, like a torchlight, you project the light into the darkness below, in the inconscience below. So the image goes away, bring the image again, where the mind had become silent and peaceful and empty, and a huge column of peace and light has descended from very high above into the mind, got consolidated there, and once it has been consolidated, it comes down along the vertebral column to the base of the spine. While it is coming down, it is passing to the upper limbs, it is passing to the organs inside the chest and the torso. And when it has come to the base of the spine, from there it goes to the lower limbs. And from the base of the spine, like a torchlight, you focus the light on the darkness below, the light and peace on the darkness below. It will not be able to go much, the darkness will eat it up, but still a beginning has to be made. Yes, you can open your eyes. So once a month you can do this meditation, while ordinary meditation you all of you do. So once a month you can do this. Cleaning of the inconscient is necessary in integral yoga. So all the movements are necessary. The psychic being, of course, is the first thing necessary, but cleaning of the inconscience is also necessary.
Can I ask,
Sir,
can I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
I had 2-3 questions. So you had first, when you had mentioned about collective yoga and the terrestrial inconscience and how that is going together, Mother also had one sentence where she said that even the perfection of one person can change the world, right? Of
Yes,
course.
yes. Collective yoga. I had actually given two answers to that question by Makram Paranjali. One answer, and the first answer was that a collective yoga doesn't mean that it has to be done by collectivity. One person can do it for the collectivity.
Okay.
One person can do anything for the collectivity. A single person can do it for the collectivity. And the second one was of this terrestrial inconscience.
Now that makes sense. Right? The second question was when you're talking about the resistance of mental inconscience, right? I found it very interesting that that's harder than material inconscience. How do we practically see the resistance of mental inconscience? Because if that's harder, how do we practically see it in everyday life, or how do we work with it?
Yes, because you see all the obstructions or the oppositions of life are due to the mind's more and more complex activity into the life of the people. When the mind was more simple, and the animals don't have such complexity, na? Their mind is not that developed like us, so they don't have this complexity of in regarding relations, in regarding egoism. So all that ego has made it more complex. The ego has made it more hard, more rigid. So we can see it in humanity as in relation to the others of the animal kingdom. So our ego which makes all the difference.
The third and last question was, you mentioned the word active. I mean, there was that word activism and activistic, right? And Mother and Shobindo keep referring to that. I'm not asking for the dictionary meaning, but because I'm not ready to elsewhere, but here, why do they use that word? Like, what do they exactly mean by it?
Atavistic is from the past because all the things from the past remain in us. As I was saying day before yesterday I think that about the commonest abuse that we use was son of a dog, son of a bitch. It's an atavistic thing because that was there in the animals. In the animals that is there, it has come from the animals. That thing is still there in us. The atavistic remnant is still carried within us. So outwardly we have controlled it by morality, but inside it is us. When we get angry, we use the word without knowing.
Sir, one question. Mother talks about descent of the grace from above and a total surrender, self-giving, perfect self-giving or perfect surrender from below. Now, sir, can you tell us what, to a common man, what does this mean, a total surrender or a total self-giving, perfect surrender, self-giving, opening from below? What does it mean in simple terms when we are in the family, when we have a relationship problems, the worldly matters? We're all engaged in our worldly, materialistic world. What is health-wise or money-wise or conversation-wise? Yeah, please tell us what it means.
Surrender is absolute. If you see what mother wants to say, surrender in his absolute sense, one has to look at Radha's prayer. What mother wrote about Radha's prayer, which is complete surrender to the divine and surrendering all one has, everything, each drop of blood, each cell of the body, whatever comes from the divine, good or bad, has to be accepted. But practically, this has to be aligned with aspiration and rejection. Practically, aspiration, rejection, surrender are the three, threesome formula given by Sri Aurobindo for progress, where surrender is only secondary to aspiration. You see, it has to go with aspiration and rejection. Otherwise, surrender is not effective. So with the aspiration of going upwards and rejection of all that is wrong, and then the surrender becomes perfect.
Can I just say something on that? Can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear me,
yes.
Dr. Basu? Yeah, okay. It has a lot to do also with saying yes, just simply saying yes to the divine, and that is the acceptance too. I work as an energy intuitive here where I'm currently, and many people, so it seems, don't know what they're doing it for. Looking for a reason, how is that benefiting my life? And it is quite astounding how little interest currently seems to be in spiritual growth. I have noticed it also when we moved here where we are currently. 6 years ago, bookshops were full of spiritual literature. Now, that category doesn't even exist. There's nothing on philosophy, religion, spirituality. So it is interesting to see that something is happening, that's without a doubt. And I have often, I have to, it's my pleasure, really. I get to deal with people who are really quite far from their truth and they're looking for their way back. So at the end of the day, though, it comes down to saying yes to that path. And I'm really, really grateful for having this wonderful gathering here with you, with people all over the world who have said yes to that path. And it gives me personal also a strengthening for the work that I am doing here. And I can very much relate to many experiences that the mother went through. And I can only encourage all of you by saying it really is worth it. It really is worth it. It really, really is. And thank you all for being here. Thank you very much for this wonderful course. It's been very, very, very beautiful, is all I can say. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
So, Doctor, just to add, there is a word in Punjabi called panga. I don't know whether people understand it well enough or not. Panga means that you invite the trouble onto yourself. So once your psychic opens in whichever way, you can't go back. The only way is to going forward. And of course, going forward is not easy. As you said that aspiration, rejection, surrender, all these things have to. Now you are strung in the middle of things. You can't go back to where you were, and you have only to go forward. And that's the process that has to go on. And the triple principle that you explained is wonderful principle. I mean, you can stumble. It's not as if everything would be hunky-dory, things will work out. But each experience in life will some way or the other take you there. And I was reading once, he says, she comes and resides in your heart, and the process is taken over by her. You don't run it. You have no, I mean, it's a silly ego which comes in the way. Otherwise, she runs the entire process by herself. So if that's reassuring, that's something to think about.
Right. Correct.
Yeah, but the good part is, I think someone asked that day, Ritu, that how do we know our psychic is opened? The fact is that you're here, that the psychic is opened. Otherwise, you won't be here. Now, you may judge yourself to be in the beginning of the process, middle or end. Well, that's a material. You can never know where you are. It's not for you to know even. It's the mother who knows where you have to be. Yeah, well, good doctor. At least I think MS Maxwell, that's what your name, Anika? Yeah, that's right.
It's
I think
Anika.
you put it very rightly. I mean, people have come here together, and I think there's one line that you quoted about the mother, that even one person can make all the difference. And she's made all the difference, frankly. The mother has made all the difference. And it is immaterial how things are. I mean, sometimes you get depressed that look at the way things are going on in the world. But yet, there's something there which still pulls you out all the time. You go down and you come back again. It's like a ball thrown down and it rises up again. It's a tough call. I mean, he says that his yoga begins where others end. And this one is just the beginning of things for us to really muster our way through. Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, James, it is time to wind up today.
Yeah, the doc, just one thing. I mean, we are going to end this entire in 3 days' time, but we wouldn't like this to end, frankly. I don't know how you will find a way to continue this.
James had to have a way out how we could further.
Yeah, because, listen, this is satsang really, essentially, right? So if we can continue this in some way or the other, it'll be very nice. We'll be grateful.
We shall reconvene again, but in another form, in another context.
Yeah, whichever way. I would think that sorry, James, sorry for butting in. My apologies.
Sure, no problem.
I was thinking of something like a process which is once a week or once in a fortnight, whatever Dr. Basu and you consider feasible. So if it is, it'll be very nice. The point is, it'll keep you on course. So rather than frittering energies away, there's a constant reinforcement. There are people who think like you, hopefully are pointing to the same direction. And then you get a reassurance, yes, things are not as bad as they seem to be. So please consider.
Yeah, posing our hurdles and what insights we have gained over ruminating and understanding and meditating, as Sir says. Just see how far is it plausible and feasible.
Thank you, Sundar.
So
Yeah.
business, yeah.
Yeah. Well, all these things will be very deeply considered, sir. And so until tomorrow.
Yes, thank you.
Wish you all a very pleasant evening, pleasant day. And thank you, Dr. Basu. And we meet again tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Good. We'll see you then. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Anika.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hendrik. Thank you, Dr. Basu.